So you won't know who I am. Most of you don't. I've been in Balmain for about 22 years now. I've been coming here for probably 35. When I first moved to Sydney, I'm big into music. I play music. Live music is a huge part of my life. And I first started coming to Balmain probably about the mid-80s to go to places like the Bridge, Three Weeds, the old Three Weeds, all the pubs around here. Pub culture was a big part of it. Wind back the clock a bit. Born in northern rural Victoria in 1965, 56 years old. Grew up on a farm. Joined up at 17, joined the Air Force, started to learn to fly, transferred to the Army, became a chopper pilot. Spent 10 years or so flying choppers in the Army. One of the jobs I did in the Army was ADC to the Governor-General, who at the time was Bill Hayden. So that opened my eyes up. A lot of exposure to really interesting, different people, politicians, artists, all sorts of big thinkers. Left the Army, went overseas for 5 years, knocked around overseas 4 years. Worked on boats, worked as language teacher, all sorts of hospitality jobs. Fetched up in Ireland, did marketing work for a while, grant applications for the European Community, the Tiger economy at the time, and ended up back in Australia for the Olympics. Got married, worked for a couple of years as an administrator at Sydney University, freelance journalism, bit of publishing, bit of sort of work in extras, writing scripts and dramaturgy work. This moved to living in Balmain at this stage. A bunch of stuff, labouring work, PR work, all sorts of things. I was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years and our son was born. He's now 15. Goes to secondary college down here, the Balmain campus. Got divorced about 10 years ago. Spent much of the last decade as an aged and disability carer locally, and also driving the community bus, the old Inner West Transport Access community bus. And in the mix there, I worked at the Willie Wallace pub for a few years, delivered newspapers, lots of kind of local bitsy jobs here and there, and music. Joined bands, played in bands. Currently play for a band called the Grateful Dads. You see a video we've done. Sort of a band that came out of the Birchgrove Primary School. All our kids were at, doing their music, and the Birchie has got a fantastic music program. So we said, right, we'll get a old farts band going, and that sort of blossomed into a pretty reasonable kind of gigging life around town, which is great for us all and keeps us young. So that's a big part of my life too, is music, and I still play gigs around the place. Certainly not so much over COVID, but hopefully that will spark up again. The last 4 or 5 years I've been able to shift back into professional work as our son's headed off to high school and become more independent. So I have been working in policy and stakeholder engagement work for a locally based sort of not-for-profit think tank, which has a focus on Western Sydney. You can check that out. Done policy work in things like urban heat in Western Sydney, utility transition, sustainable water use, water-sensitive urban design, a lot of stuff to do with, the shift out in Western Sydney towards a more sustainable way of life. And part of that's also been policy work on social issues, obesity, domestic violence, socio-economic differences, and transport issues, education issues, health issues, that sort of stuff. Client consulting work as well. So I've done a little bit of work with, major companies, some, infrastructure companies and so forth. Again, about 18 months ago, I started working as a strategic manager of lithium-ion batteries for an ASX-listed startup. Did that for 6 months. Diverged ways there for various reasons. But I'm in that space. I'm in that kind of energy and sustainable sort of public policy transition space. And I think that's a useful set of kind of qualifications and experience to bring to a council like IWC, which has a really good forward-looking kind of approach to practical transition matters. And there's lots more we can do. There's heaps of good ideas bouncing around the mix, and our council, being bigger, has some pretty good staff. Like, there's some really good professional resources in there, which I think we could make much better use of. And let's flex our muscles and see what the larger council can do in terms of implementing some of these really groundbreaking practical policies. I mean, that's me. I'm local, I hang out. I wouldn't call myself a community activist as such. I'm just kind of just a member of the community. I did co-convene the Balmain Amnesty for a couple of years at the height of the refugee Tampa stuff. I've never been a member of a political party. I'm not really a party joiner, not because I instinctively, you know, hate parties. I'm pragmatic. You know, governments really need that cohesive strategic policy platform. So parties, for all their evils, are probably the least worst way of forming governments, right? So I'm happy to work with that, but I just don't. I think I'm too gobby. I like just going, you know, sound of Jack's own voice to sort of toe the line on a party basis. So I have some sympathy for party members because you are a little bit locked in. You can't go mouthing off in a local election campaign like this because, you know, bosses up the chain will find you on the front page of the telly. Albo, what's this gobby Labor Party? Nobody numpty in Balmain saying. So I get that. And it's the same with the Greens as well. I think I have sympathy with those who say the parties have kind of become far too beholden to sexual interests and far too much, you know, self-replicating mechanisms. But all four major parties need a bit of an injection of external kind of talent, I think. And certainly at the council level, I have some sympathy for the argument that people put up to say that it's just far too dominant here at council level. Yep, I think that's a fair cop. One of my roles in this election campaign will be to try to get some proper answers out of both Covey as the Greens candidate and Darcy as the ALP candidate. Other interests, well, I like surfing, I try to keep fit, I like to socialise, have fun. Really, you probably don't need to know much else about me. You can poke around, have a Google at your peril. I've got a bit of a, you know, footprint online. I've been sort of commenting and making sort of presence felt online for 20 odd years, going way back to the early days of the net when I did a bit of work for a journalist called Margot Kingston, who ran the Sydney Morning Herald's website for a while. So I'm pretty mouthy. You probably see my name, you know, in the letters page of the Herald too. I love the sound of my own voice and admire my own opinions enormously. But this is the first time I've ever stood up and had a go election-wise, so I thought probably it was a good time to put my candidacy where my gob's been for a fair bit of the last 20 years. Rightio. Thanks.